Sarah Lane's breath caught as she stood in front of the old wooden door, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. The sound of her heartbeat echoed in her ears, but she forced herself to focus. She was a detective, a professional. Nothing should shake her. Not even this. Not even him. The man they called Shadow had eluded the law for years, leaving behind a trail of unsolved disappearances, cryptic messages, and haunting silence. But tonight would be different. She was certain of it. After months of careful investigation, Sarah was poised to bring him in. Finally, she would uncover the man behind the mask, the man who had evaded justice for far too long. She stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of oil and old wood. Her partner, Detective Grant, moved beside her, his eyes scanning the surroundings. She knew the drill. Move quickly, move quietly. They had been briefed on Travis Shadow Barlow's possible location, and all signs pointed to this place. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. In the far corner of the room, a man stood, his back to them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a black coat, his face obscured by shadows. His posture was unassuming, casual even, but Sarah's gut told her that he was the one they had been hunting. Freeze! N-Y-P-D. Sarah's voice rang out sharply. The man turned slowly, deliberately, his face still shrouded in darkness. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, she wondered if he would flee, but instead he took a step forward. Then, it happened. As the light from her flashlight hit his face, Sarah's breath hitched. It couldn't be. "Travis," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. The man, Travis Shadow Barlow, met her eyes, and in that instant, Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. Time seemed to stop as the years of separation collapsed into one unbearable moment. The man standing before her, the criminal mastermind she had spent months tracking, was not just any criminal. He was the man she had once loved, the one she had thought lost forever. The man who had broken her heart. Her mind spun with disbelief. How could this be? How could Travis, the boy she had once shared her hopes and dreams with, become this? How had he gone from the man she knew, her confidant, her love, to this cold, calculating criminal? "Sarah," Travis said, his voice low, barely a whisper. "It's been a long time." She couldn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest as a whirlwind of emotions surged through her. Anger, betrayal, confusion. But underneath it all, something deeper lingered. A pull she couldn't ignore. A connection that had never truly faded. Grant moved closer, his voice sharp, breaking the fragile silence. "What's going on here, Sarah?" Sarah didn't answer. Her eyes never left Travis's face, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of something familiar in his gaze. Something that made her question everything she had believed about him. "Hands on the wall now!" Grant barked, and Travis complied, his movements slow and deliberate. The entire scene felt surreal, as if Sarah had slipped into a nightmare where the rules no longer made sense. The handcuffs clicked around Travis's wrists, and Sarah took a step back, her mind racing. She had him. After all this time, she had finally caught him. But as she looked into his eyes, the sense of victory she had anticipated felt hollow. There was no triumph in this moment, only an ache in her chest that refused to be ignored. She turned away from him, the weight of the past pressing down on her. This was not the reunion she had imagined. Not by a long shot. The ride to the station felt endless. the hum of the police cruiser almost too loud in the silence that had settled between Sarah and her partner. Grant was focused on the road, his jaw tight with concentration. He hadn't noticed, or maybe he didn't care, that Sarah was barely aware of her surroundings. Her thoughts were elsewhere, back in that dimly lit warehouse on the man in the back seat. Travis, Shadow, her past, the man she had tried to forget. But seeing him again, standing there in front of her, had undone everything. All the walls she'd carefully built up over the years, all the justifications she had made for moving on, had crumbled in that instant. The person she had once loved, so intensely, so completely, was now the very person she was supposed to bring to justice. She hadn't expected this. Not in a million years. The car pulled up to the precinct, its tires crunching over the gravel. Sarah didn't move as Grant turned off the engine. Her mind was still reeling, her heart still heavy with conflicting emotions. The air in the cruiser was thick, almost suffocating, and she could feel her own breath catching in her chest. She hadn't breathed properly since she saw him. Grant broke the silence. "You good, Lane?" His tone was neutral, but there was an edge to it, as if he sensed her unease, but didn't understand it. Sarah nodded, her hands gripping the edge of her seat to steady herself. "Yeah," she murmured, forcing the words out. "Just processing." Grant gave her a look but said nothing. He was used to Sarah's cool demeanor, her professional composure, but she knew he could tell something was off. After all, they had worked together for years. They knew each other too well. They walked into the precinct, where a few officers were milling around, their voices low as they glanced up. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, wondering why she seemed so out of place. But it was the officer at the desk who caught her attention, an older man with a gray beard, a longtime member of the team, and someone Sarah trusted. "Sarah," he greeted her warmly, but then he noticed the tension in her posture and quickly added, "Everything all right?" She looked at him, then at the holding cell where Travis was being processed. His figure was silhouetted in the harsh fluorescent light, his face hidden by the shadows once again. For a moment, Sarah thought she could still see traces of the young man she had once known, the boy she had spent endless summer nights with, talking about their future. But that was a lifetime ago, a past that felt like another world entirely. "I'm fine," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "Just need to make sure everything's in order." She was lying, of course, but she had no idea what else to say. How could she explain what she was feeling? How could she even begin to articulate the confusion, the rawness, the longing that had bubbled to the surface the moment their eyes met? The officer at the desk nodded, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. She turned away from him quickly, unwilling to let him see the cracks she was trying to hide. She couldn't let herself falter. Not now. She walked down the hallway to the interrogation room, the sound of her boots echoing in the empty corridor. The door to the room was closed, but she could feel the presence of Travis on the other side, as if he were already waiting for her. For a moment, she hesitated, standing still in front of the door. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, each one more intense than the last. How could she do this? How could she interrogate him, bring him to trial, when all she wanted to do was ask him, why? Why had he left her? Why had he become the very thing she had fought against for so long? The door opened suddenly, and Grant's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Hey, you coming?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost as if he could sense her inner turmoil. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to take a step forward. She couldn't linger here. Not with the past looming so close. Not with Travis in that room, waiting. She was a detective. She had a job to do. And right now, that job was to understand why the man she had once loved had become a criminal mastermind. She walked into the interrogation room, and there he was, sitting at the table, his wrists bound with handcuffs, but his gaze as sharp and piercing as ever. For a moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. He looked the same, and yet he was completely different. "Travis," she said softly, her voice steady but with a hint of something raw beneath it. "It's been a long time." He didn't respond immediately, but Sarah could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He hadn't expected this either. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "It's been too long, Sarah." The room felt unbearably small as Sarah took a seat across from Travis. The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a sterile glow that only heightened the tension between them. She kept her hands clasped together, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. Every muscle in her body was taut, wound so tightly she feared she might break apart if she moved. Travis's gaze never left her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Sarah tried to steady herself to pull back into the professional persona she had worked so hard to cultivate, but it wasn't working, not this time, not with him. Travis was the man she had once loved. He had been her everything, but that man was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating figure sitting in front of her now. The shadow, a criminal mastermind who had led a life of violence and deception, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Yet despite everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still in there somewhere. The boy she had loved, the boy who had stolen her heart. "How did it happen?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She hadn't meant to ask that question, hadn't even known she was going to, but it slipped out before she could stop herself. Travis's eyes softened for a moment, his jaw tightening. He was silent for so long that Sarah began to wonder if he would ever speak. But then, slowly, he leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You want to know how I became this?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "How I ended up on the wrong side of the law?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know. She had to understand how the man she had once known could turn into this, how he could throw everything away. "It wasn't a choice," he said, his voice tinged with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I didn't choose this life. It chose me." Sarah's breath hitched as his words sank in. She had always known, deep down, that there was more to his story than what she had been told. The boy she had loved, he was no criminal. He had been forced into this. But by what? By whom? She leaned forward, her eyes searching his face for any hint of the truth. "What happened, Travis? What really happened?" For the first time, he looked away, his gaze drifting toward the wall. Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes, the pain he had buried so deep. It was a pain she knew all too well, the kind of pain that shattered you and left you broken, struggling to find a way out. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice cracking. "I never did." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a lifetime of regret. Sarah felt something stir inside her, something she couldn't quite name. Sympathy, maybe? Or was it guilt? Guilt for having never asked these questions when they were together. Guilt for walking away when he needed her most. She had never known the truth. She had only known the boy she had loved. The boy who had disappeared without a trace. "Then why, Travis?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you come to me?" His gaze snapped back to hers, and for a brief moment, the mask he had so carefully built around himself cracked. Sarah saw it then, saw the raw emotion in his eyes, the pain, the hurt, the longing. "I couldn't," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought you were better off without me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always wondered why he had left without a word, why he had just disappeared from her life. And now, in this sterile room, he was telling her the truth. It wasn't because he had stopped loving her. It was because he had believed that by leaving her, he was protecting her. But it wasn't protection. It was abandonment. And now, as they sat across from each other, Sarah understood that it was more than just the love they had shared that had torn them apart. It was the world they had been forced to live in, the world that had taken everything from them. Sarah's heart ached as she stared at him. She wanted to reach across the table, to touch him, to make him understand that he hadn't ruined anything, that maybe they could still have something, even if it wasn't what they had once imagined. But instead, she remained still, trapped by the walls she had built around herself, the walls that separated the detective from the woman who had once loved him. For a long moment, the room was silent again. Neither of them spoke. And for the first time since their reunion, Sarah didn't feel the need to say anything. She could see it in his eyes, the words he couldn't say. And she realized, perhaps, she didn't need him to say them. She had already heard them in her heart. The room was heavy with unspoken tension. The silence between them now an almost palpable force. Sarah's mind was still reeling from Travis's admission, but she couldn't afford to lose focus. She had a job to do, a duty to the victims who depended on her. Her role as a detective couldn't be overshadowed by the man sitting across from her, no matter how much her heart ached. Yet every time she tried to push the past aside, it came rushing back. The laughter they had shared under the summer stars, the way he had held her hand as if he never wanted to let go, the way he had looked at her with so much love, love that now felt like a distant memory. But that was the past, she reminded herself. This was now. "Tell me about the others," Sarah said, her voice firm, trying to find the professionalism she had lost moments ago. "The missing people, the trail, who's behind it?" Travis remained silent for a beat, his eyes clouded with something Sarah couldn't quite decipher. He was withholding. She could feel it. But she also knew that this was the moment. If she could break through the layers of secrecy, if she could get him to trust her, she might finally understand the full extent of the criminal organization he was entangled in. "I can't give you names," he said, finally breaking the silence. "You wouldn't believe me even if I did, but I can tell you who's pulling the strings." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her pulse quickening. "Then tell me." Travis hesitated again, the weight of his next words hanging in the air. "It's bigger than anything you're prepared for. The people you think you're dealing with, they're just pawns. The ones who control everything, they're untouchable." Her breath caught in her throat. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Travis shifted in his seat, his gaze never leaving hers. "You'll find out soon enough, but you won't like what you uncover. It's not just about money or power, Sarah. It's about control over everything. Over you." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to understand their motivations and intentions. But this was something else entirely. The notion that she was part of a larger game, that she had been unknowingly caught in a web of manipulation. It made her stomach churn. "I don't understand," she admitted, her voice tight. "Why are you telling me this? What's your game, Travis?" He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I'm not the one with the power anymore. I'm just trying to survive. I'm telling you because you need to know the truth. But whether you believe me or not is up to you." Sarah's mind was racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but she couldn't see the whole picture yet. She needed more information, but she also knew that Travis wasn't someone she could trust fully. Not yet. Not with everything at stake. "You think I'll just walk away from this?" she asked, her voice steady. "You think I'll let you go because of some sob story?" Travis looked at her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place. "No," he said, his voice low. "But you'll think about it. You'll think about who's really behind this. And you'll think about the people you thought you were working for." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. His words were like a warning, a threat. But they weren't just directed at her. They were meant for everyone in her world. The world she had spent so many years trusting, believing in. Now, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet, and she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Her hands shook slightly as she set her notepad down, the pages filled with notes that now felt meaningless. Nothing she had written down made sense anymore. The rules had changed, and she didn't know how to navigate this new terrain. All she had were the fragments of truth Travis had given her, and they were as fragmented as her own thoughts. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment she saw beyond the criminal, the man she had once known, the boy who had once held her close, whispered promises, and believed in a future together. But that boy was gone, and in his place sat a man broken by the very world he had once tried to escape. "I don't know what you want from me," Sarah said, her voice quieter now, softer. "But I can't help you unless you tell me everything." Travis's expression softened, but only for a second. It was as if he were allowing himself a moment of vulnerability before the walls slammed down again. "You won't get everything," he said, his voice rough. "But I'll tell you this. This isn't just about me. It's about you, too. You're tangled up in this now. You can't walk away from it, not anymore." The words settled between them like a heavy stone, and Sarah felt the weight of them pressing on her chest. She didn't know what to believe. She didn't know what was real anymore. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, she couldn't go back. She couldn't pretend she didn't care about the man sitting in front of her, no matter how much she wanted to. Sarah stood outside the interrogation room, her hand on the cold metal door. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, emotions, and contradictions, each one vying for attention, demanding to be understood. She had walked into that room with a clear goal in mind: to get answers, to bring the man who had been a ghost in her life for so long to justice. But now, nothing seemed clear anymore. She had always prided herself on being able to separate her personal life from her professional one, but Travis had shattered that wall. Every time she looked at him, she saw not just the criminal he had become, but the boy she had once loved, the boy who had left without a word, who had disappeared into the night like a fading dream. And now, here he was. sitting on the other side of a cold metal table, still holding her heart in ways she couldn't fully explain. She wasn't sure if she was the detective or the woman who had once loved him. She wasn't sure if she was still the same person who had walked into this precinct that morning. Grant appeared in the hallway, his eyes scanning her face with quiet concern. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Sarah forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside her. "Yeah, just needed a moment," she replied, her voice betraying her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing herself in this case, that the lines between right and wrong were blurring in ways she couldn't control. "You don't have to do this alone," Grant said, his tone gentle but insistent. "We've got your back, Sarah." She nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She knew what she had to do, but that didn't make it any easier, not with Travis involved. She returned to the interrogation room, her mind steeled for what came next. But when she walked in, Travis didn't look up immediately. He was slumped in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. But there was something in the way he sat, something vulnerable, something human, that made Sarah's heart ache. "Why didn't you come back?" she asked, her voice a mixture of frustration and longing. She had to know. She had to understand why he had left her without a word, without even a trace. Travis's gaze flickered up to meet hers, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw the glimmer of the man he had been, the man she had known. But then the walls came back up, cold and unyielding. "I couldn't," he said, his voice low and regretful. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought you'd be better off without me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent years wondering why he had left, why he had chosen to disappear without a trace. And now, hearing him say it, he had thought she would be better off without him. She didn't know whether to feel angry, heartbroken, or something else entirely. "You should have come to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We could have figured it out together." But Travis didn't respond right away. Instead, he let out a slow breath, his gaze hardening. "I wasn't the man you thought I was," he said, his voice edged with pain. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm not him." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. She had always believed in the man she had once loved, the man who had promised her the world. But the truth was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The boy she had loved had been swallowed up by a world of violence and fear, and in the process, she had lost him. "I don't want to believe that," she said softly, her words barely a whisper. "I don't want to believe that the man I loved is gone." Travis looked at her then, and for a moment, their gazes locked in a silent understanding. It was as if they were both mourning the same loss, the loss of the love they had shared, the loss of the future they had once imagined. "I'm sorry," Travis said, the words heavy with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't bring you into this world. I couldn't drag you down with me." His words were like a knife in Sarah's chest, but they weren't just words. They were the truth, and they hurt more than anything she had ever felt. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how wrong he was, to tell him that she could have helped him, that they could have faced it together. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and met his gaze once more. "I don't know what to do with this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do with you." Travis looked at her, his expression a mix of sorrow and longing. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah. I don't expect you to forget what I've done. But I need you to understand that I never stopped caring about you. I never stopped loving you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. Sarah felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent so long building up the walls around her heart, and now it felt like they were crumbling, piece by piece. She didn't know how to respond to him. She didn't know how to feel. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But here we are." Travis didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, staring at her, his face a mixture of regret and something else she couldn't place. And for a moment, it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. Not the case, not the law, not the reasons why they couldn't be together. All that mattered was the quiet, painful truth that lingered between them. The truth that their love, though real, had been lost to time. And now, as they sat across from each other, all they could do was confront the pieces of the past they had both tried so desperately to forget. The next few days blurred together, each one folding into the next as Sarah struggled to make sense of everything. She couldn't focus at work. She couldn't focus anywhere. The case, the criminal mastermind, the missing people, all of it felt distant now, irrelevant compared to the chaos swirling in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Travis's face, the raw pain in his eyes as he confessed that he still loved her. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he had looked at her when he spoke of the past, of the summer they had spent together, the promises they had made. It was as if they were both trapped in a memory, frozen in time, unable to move forward. But the truth was they had both changed. They weren't the same people anymore. Sarah hadn't expected the emotions she was feeling to be so overwhelming. Guilt, anger, longing, confusion. Each one tugged at her in different directions, like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. She wanted to hate him, to be angry at the man he had become, to put the past behind her and focus on the case. But she couldn't. She couldn't bring herself to hate him. Not when everything he had said had rung so true. He had been trying to protect her, to keep her from the dangerous life he had fallen into. But at what cost? She had once believed that love could conquer anything, that love could heal any wound. But now, sitting in her apartment staring out the window into the dark night, she wasn't so sure. Love had torn them apart once. Was it capable of putting them back together again? The phone on her desk rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She jumped, surprised at the sudden interruption. She had been so lost in her own mind that she hadn't even heard the soft click of the receiver. "Sarah," Grant's voice came through the line, his tone urgent. "You need to come in, we've got a lead." She pushed the thoughts of Travis aside and stood up quickly. Duty called. This was what she had to focus on now. The case, the victims, the people who were still missing, who were still counting on her to find them. "I'm on my way," Sarah replied, her voice steady as she hung up the phone. She dressed quickly, the familiar routine of getting ready for work a small comfort in the midst of the emotional chaos that still raged inside her. She slipped on her jacket and grabbed her keys, making sure the last lingering thoughts of Travis didn't hold her back. She couldn't afford to get lost in him again. Not now. Not when she had a job to do. She drove to the precinct, her thoughts consumed by the lead Grant had mentioned. It wasn't just another dead end. This time, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of urgency she hadn't felt before. Maybe it was the desperation to regain some semblance of control, or maybe it was the realization that the case was closer to its end than she had imagined. When Sarah arrived at the precinct, Grant was waiting for her by the door. His face was serious, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a tight-lipped expression. "Got something for you," he said, leading her toward a small conference room. "We've got a name." As they entered the room, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the board covered with photos, maps, and notes. It was the same setup she had been working on for weeks, but this time, there was a new addition, a photograph of a man she hadn't seen before. "This is Henry Coyle," Grant said, pointing to the photo. "He's one of the key players we've been tracking. We've had his name on the radar for a while, but now we've got some concrete evidence linking him to the disappearances." Sarah studied the photo, her mind racing. Henry Coyle. The name was unfamiliar, but something about it felt important. She could feel the puzzle pieces slowly falling into place, but she couldn't yet see the full picture. She reached for the file Grant handed her, flipping through the pages quickly. The man in the photo had connections to multiple criminal organizations, including one that was tied to the people Travis had warned her about. "We need to move quickly," Grant said, his voice low. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Sarah nodded, her mind shifting back into work mode. She had to focus. She had to find these people. But as she glanced back at the photo of Henry Coyle, her thoughts involuntarily returned to Travis. She couldn't ignore the fact that he had warned her about the danger she was now walking into. She needed answers. She needed to know what Travis had meant when he said she was tangled in all of this. She needed to confront him again. But for now, there was no time for that. Not when lives were on the line. The lead on Henry Coyle pushed Sarah into overdrive. She spent the next few days buried in paperwork, tracing his movements and trying to piece together a web of connections that, at times, felt impossible to untangle. Her mind raced through the hours, driven by the knowledge that someone else's life was at stake. But still, every quiet moment between tasks, her thoughts drifted back to Travis, haunting her, challenging her sense of right and wrong. There was a part of her that still couldn't believe she was doing this. She had spent years building a life, a career, founded on the pursuit of justice. And yet, here she was, tangled in a mess of memories and emotions she never expected to confront. And it wasn't just the case. Not entirely. It was him. The man she had loved, the man she still cared for in ways she couldn't explain. The truth was, Sarah had never fully let go of Travis, not in her heart. But she couldn't admit that to anyone, especially not to herself. She glanced over at her phone, the name Travis flashing briefly on the screen before she quickly turned it face down, unwilling to answer. She hadn't seen him since that day in the interrogation room, and though part of her longed to hear his voice, to get the answers she needed, another part of her feared what might happen if she did. Her resolve was tested again when the phone rang later that evening, this time with an unfamiliar number. Sarah hesitated, then answered. "Sarah?" Travis's voice came through, quiet and measured, yet still carrying the weight of everything they hadn't said. "Travis," she said, the name tasting strange on her tongue. She had thought that the time apart would help her find clarity, but if anything, it made things worse. Her pulse quickened, her stomach tightening with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "You're still looking into Coyle," he said, and she was struck by how he knew. How did he know that she was chasing leads so relentlessly, as if her life depended on it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence hang between them, letting the moment stretch out longer than either of them probably expected. "How do you know that?" she finally asked, the words thick with suspicion. "Because you're not the only one looking for him," Travis replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to help you, Sarah. I don't want you getting too close to Coyle, to the people he's working with. It's bigger than you think." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the warning. The same warning he had given her when they spoke last. The world he was part of, the one that he had wanted to protect her from, was crashing into hers faster than she could stop it. "I'm already too close," she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I can't walk away now. Not when lives are at stake." The line fell silent for a moment, and for the first time since their conversation began, she felt the weight of his gaze, even through the phone. She could almost hear the desperation in his voice when he spoke again. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm trying to keep you safe. I always have been." His words hung in the air, and for a moment Sarah couldn't breathe. The confession was there, raw and unguarded. He still cared about her. He still wanted to protect her despite everything that had happened. It was everything she had wanted to hear from him. And yet, hearing it now only complicated things more. "Travis," she said softly, her voice faltering, "I don't know what you want from me." "Just be careful," he urged. "Coyle's not who you think he is. And the people behind him, they're pulling strings that you can't even begin to understand." It was too much to process. Her emotions were too tangled, too complex to unravel in a single conversation. But as she held the phone to her ear, she realized something. She couldn't turn her back on him. She couldn't walk away from him again, not after everything he had just told her. "I'll figure it out," Sarah said, though the words felt weak even as she said them. She was lying, not just to him, but to herself. She had no idea how she was going to get out of this, how she was going to make sense of the mess she was in. But what she did know was that she couldn't do it alone. And in some way, she hadn't been alone in this at all. "Just stay safe," Travis said, his voice soft, almost broken. "That's all I'm asking." And then the line went dead. Sarah sat in the silence, staring at the phone in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. What had just happened? Had she just let him back in? The walls she had worked so hard to build between them were starting to crumble, piece by piece. The walls she had built to protect herself from the man she once loved were fading. But that didn't change the fact that she was still a detective, and she still had a job to do. The truth was, no matter how much she wanted to ignore it, her life was inextricably linked to his now. They were connected by more than just the past. They were connected by the present, the case, the danger, the fight to survive. It was a connection neither of them could escape. For the first time in days, Sarah finally felt a shift, a quiet realization. The case wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice. It was about uncovering the truth about herself, about her past, about Travis. And it was about choosing which path she would take when the lines between right and wrong blurred so completely. The lead on Henry Coyle moved quickly after that phone call. With the information she had gathered, Sarah was able to track down a potential location for Coyle's hideout, an old industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, abandoned for years. Her team moved swiftly, preparing for a raid that could finally bring down one of the most elusive criminals she had ever encountered. As they gathered in the staging area, Sarah's mind was still unsettled. Travis's words echoed in her head. "The people behind him, the ones pulling the strings, they're untouchable." The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that Coil was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. But how much larger? How deep did this go? She had to push it out of her mind for now. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the chance to take down a dangerous man. But something gnawed at Sarah as she donned her vest, checked her gun, and prepared for the raid. She felt the weight of Travis's warning. The shadows of his presence hung over her like a dark cloud. As she arrived at the industrial complex with the team, they secured the perimeter. The building was quiet. Too quiet. But Sarah knew better than to let her guard down. This wasn't over yet. There was something off about this place, something she couldn't put her finger on. She motioned for her team to move in, and they advanced into the building cautiously, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The dim lighting inside barely illuminated their surroundings, the air thick with dust and the scent of rust. They moved through the corridors, their guns raised, eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Sarah's heartbeat quickened as they approached the main office of the building, where they expected to find Coil, or at least his associates. But when they opened the door, the scene before them was not what they had anticipated. The room was empty. The monitors were dark. The file cabinet stood open, their contents spilling out onto the floor, papers strewn everywhere. The room felt abandoned, empty, save for a few discarded items. Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the room frantically. Her gut told her something was wrong. The pieces weren't fitting together the way they should. Then, in the corner of the room, something caught her eye. A photograph, one she recognized. It was a photo of Travis, but it wasn't just a casual photo. This was a framed photograph, one that had been carefully placed on a desk in the center of the room. And beside it, a small note. Sarah picked up the note, her fingers trembling as she read the words scrawled across the page. She's too close. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. Don't trust her. Don't trust anyone. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her pulse raced, and she felt a cold chill sweep over her. She knew exactly what this meant. It wasn't just Coil's operation that was being targeted. It was her. She had been caught in something much darker, much deeper than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about the case anymore. This was personal. "Grant!" she called, her voice sharp. "Get in here, now!" Grant entered the room quickly, his eyes flicking from Sarah to the note in her hand. He didn't need to ask. He saw the same realization in her eyes. The walls were closing in around them, and they were both trapped in a game they couldn't fully understand. "Who else knows?" Sarah asked, her voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside her. Grant hesitated. I don't know. We haven't heard anything from the higher-ups about any compromised intel." She didn't believe him. She couldn't. The truth was clear. Someone in the department, someone Sarah had trusted, was working against her. Someone had known she was getting close to the truth, and that someone had been watching her every move. The betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined. "This isn't just Coil," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Grant. "It's bigger. It's all connected." "Sarah, what's going on?" Grant asked, his voice tense. "Who's pulling the strings here?" She turned to face him, the weight of the truth finally sinking in. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I think I need to find out, and I don't think I can do it alone." Grant looked at her, his face conflicted, but before he could respond, Sarah's phone rang again. She didn't need to check the number to know who it was. "Sarah," Travis's voice came through, urgent and low. "You need to get out. Now!" Her heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. Someone's been tracking you, Travis said, his voice filled with a sense of urgency that Sarah had never heard before. You're walking right into a trap. Coil's a decoy. The real danger is much closer than you think. The floor beneath Sarah's feet seemed to shift as the gravity of his words settled in. What do you mean? Who's behind this? I can't tell you over the phone, Travis replied, but I'll be waiting for you. You need to make a choice, Sarah. Either you trust me or you trust them. The line went dead. Her mind raced, spinning with the implications of his words. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Everyone was a potential threat, and the truth, whatever it was slipping further and further out of reach. The betrayal she had felt only moments ago now consumed her. Someone close to her, someone she had trusted, had been playing her all along. And as the shadows closed in around her, she realized that she had no choice but to walk into the darkness. The game had changed, and Sarah was caught in the middle of it. Sarah drove through the city, her hands gripping the steering wheel with such force that her knuckles were white. The city lights flickered past her like brief flashes of clarity in a world that no longer made sense. Travis's words echoed in her mind. Either you trust me, or you trust them. Who were them? And how had everything, every shred of trust she had built, fallen apart so quickly? The reality of what was happening hit her with full force. She had known all along that the world she operated in was dangerous. She had always been prepared for the risks, the lies, the betrayals. But this was different. This was personal. This was a game she had never signed up to play. She couldn't go back to the precinct, not now. She couldn't walk into that room full of people, all of them looking at her as if they were in on the same secret that she was now locked out of. Number. She needed answers, and the only place she could think of to get them was the one place she hadn't dared to go. Travis. It had been a long time since they had shared any space, any quiet moments together, but it wasn't the past she was seeking. It was the truth, the answers that only he could give her now. He had warned her, but had he also been warning himself? Had she been blind to everything around her because she was too focused on her need to resolve the case? As Sarah pulled up to the small apartment complex, where Travis had once lived, the dim light from the street lamps seemed to cast long shadows across the pavement. The apartment was almost too quiet, too still, the kind of quiet that felt suffocating. She parked the car and took a deep breath before stepping out. She hadn't been here in years. The place was unassuming, nothing more than a run-of-the-mill building in an area that was more forgotten than familiar. But it was his. This was where their worlds had once intersected, and it was where they had fallen apart. Sarah walked up the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar, as if he had been expecting her. She knocked softly, then pushed the door open with a slight creak. Travis was sitting at the small kitchen table, a mug of coffee in front of him. His eyes met hers immediately, but there was no shock, no surprise, just the quiet recognition that they were both tangled in this web of uncertainty and betrayal. "You came," he said, his voice rough with something she couldn't name. He looked tired, his features drawn and weary. But there was a softness there, too. A vulnerability that seemed almost out of place for the man she had last seen locked in a holding cell. "I had to," Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Travis. I don't know who's on my side." Travis stood up, his movement slow, deliberate. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of regret that tugged at her heart. "But you need to know the truth, the real truth, and you need to make a choice." She didn't speak. Her heart ached in ways she didn't have the words to express. She had walked into this room expecting answers, expecting clarity. But now, standing before him, she realized that there were no easy answers. There was no way to fix the past. "What is the truth, Travis?" she asked, her voice shaky, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "What's been going on? Why didn't you just tell me from the beginning?" Travis sighed, running a hand through his hair, looking away for a moment. "You wouldn't have believed me," he muttered. "Not when you were so set on justice. You're still set on it, aren't you?" Sarah didn't answer. She didn't know what to say anymore. The lines between justice and betrayal had blurred, and the weight of the choices she had to make was pressing down on her chest. "You told me to trust you," she said after a long pause. "But you kept pushing me away. You kept me in the dark." "I had to," Travis replied, stepping closer to her. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this. It's too dangerous. And now it's too late for both of us." For a moment, they stood there in silence, neither one of them moving, both of them understanding the weight of the words that had just been spoken. The silence was thick, a fragile moment of connection, of shared understanding that needed no explanation. They had both been through too much. They had both lost too much. Then, slowly, Sarah reached out, placing her hand on his arm. It wasn't a gesture of love, not exactly, but it was something more. It was a recognition of the pain, of the shared history, of the bond that had never truly broken, no matter how many years had passed. "I don't know what comes next," she said quietly, her fingers brushing against his sleeve. "But I need to know that I'm not alone in this." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Travis's expression softened. "You're not alone," he whispered. The tension between them shifted, no longer one of unspoken words and unresolved history. There was something more here now, something fragile, but real. It wasn't love, not the way it had once been, but it was something that could heal, something that could grow from the ruins of what had been. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but she knew this much. The world they had once known, the world they had built together, was gone. But in its place, there was a quiet understanding, a reconciliation through silence. They had both carried their ghosts long enough, and now they would face them together. The days that followed their quiet reconciliation were filled with uncertainty. Sarah continued to work the case, sifting through evidence, questioning informants, and chasing leads that seemed to dissipate into thin air the moment she got close. The name Henry Coyle had become a ghost, vanishing just as quickly as it had appeared. Sarah felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in on her from all sides. But the most unnerving part of it all was Travis. Even though they had shared a moment of quiet understanding, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were both running from something, running from a truth that neither of them could yet face. He had offered her no more information, no clear path to follow. All he had given her were fragments of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complicated with each passing day. It wasn't until late one evening, after hours of poring over reports and maps, that Sarah received the call that would change everything. It came from an unmarked number, the voice on the other end muffled, urgent. "Sarah, it's me." Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of Travis's voice. She felt a jolt of panic. Something was wrong. "Travis, what's going on? Where are you?" "I can't explain it over the phone," he said quickly, his voice laced with urgency. "But they know you're coming. I was right about them, Sarah. I've seen them. I've seen the people pulling the strings. They're not done with you yet." "What do you mean, not done with me yet? Who are they?" Her voice rose in desperation, the unanswered questions flooding back. She could feel the walls of the case of her entire life shifting again. "You need to leave now," Travis said, his tone firm. "I'm getting out, but you have to go, Sarah. You're in danger. If they think you know too much, they'll come after you. This is bigger than you realize. It's too dangerous for you to keep going." Sarah's breath caught. "Number, I'm not running. Not from them, not from you." She could feel her pulse racing, the weight of the decision weighing down on her. She had come too far, seen too much. She couldn't turn back now. "I'm not asking you to run, I'm asking you to survive," Travis said. "I'll do what I can, but you need to get out of the city. Now." Her hand trembled as she gripped the phone, torn between two worlds. The world she had always known and the one Travis had been trying to protect her from. She had trusted him once, and now, when it mattered most, he was asking her to trust him again. "I'll be okay," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, though doubt filled her voice. "No." Travis's voice broke through, firm and strong. "You won't be okay, not if you stay. I know what's coming." Before Sarah could say another word, the line went dead. Silence fell over her apartment, and for a long moment she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. Everything Travis had warned her about was finally here. She could no longer pretend that she was in control, that she had the answers. The people behind the cases, behind the missing persons, the ones who had been orchestrating it all, they were coming for her, and Travis was the only one who seemed to know how to fight them off. With trembling hands, Sarah grabbed her jacket and hurried out the door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave it all behind and go somewhere safe. But her heart, that part of her that still felt something for Travis, refused to let her walk away from him again. She couldn't. She wouldn't. She drove through the night, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears, the city's skyline blurred in the rearview mirror as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. She wasn't sure what she was heading toward, but she knew she was heading into danger. When she arrived at the address Travis had given her, a run-down warehouse at the edge of town, she saw no signs of life. The building was dark, abandoned-looking, with rusted metal doors and boarded-up windows. But as Sarah approached, she felt a chill run down her spine. She had never been more aware of the danger that loomed over her. Then, in the distance, she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Travis. He stepped forward, his face grim, his eyes dark with an urgency she had never seen before. "Get in," he said quickly, his voice low and filled with tension. Without hesitation, Sarah climbed into the car. The moment she shut the door, Travis slammed his foot on the accelerator, and they sped off into the night. The sound of the engine roared in her ears, but it was nothing compared to the pounding in her chest. "What's going on?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic she could feel rising inside her. "Who are these people?" "They're everywhere," Travis muttered, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "And they're not done with us yet." As they drove through the streets, Sarah could see the lights of the city behind them growing fainter, replaced by the darkness of the unknown. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made sinking in. There was no going back. Not now. "I should have never gotten you involved in this," Travis said, his voice tight with regret. "You should have stayed out of it." But Sarah shook her head. "You don't get to tell me that," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I'm here because I want to be. Because I need to be." Travis looked at her then, his expression torn between something like relief and guilt. But in that moment, they were connected in a way that transcended the chaos surrounding them. They had both made sacrifices they couldn't take back. And now they would face whatever came next together. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Sarah had chosen her path, and in doing so, she had found a quiet strength, one she had never known she had. As the hours passed, the world outside the car seemed to blur and distort. The streets were empty, the city far behind them. And yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There was no safe place anymore, no refuge from the danger that had now become their reality. Travis's knuckles were still white around the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw set in a determined line. But Sarah could see the strain in his movements, the way his shoulders were tense, as though he were preparing for something worse to come. "You should have gone, Sarah," he said again, his voice tight, as though the words were almost choking him. "This is my mess, not yours." Sarah shifted in her seat, her heart pounding. "I'm not running from you again, Travis. I made my choice." She could hear the hesitation in his voice, the fear. But more than anything, she heard the regret. The kind of regret that came from knowing you could never undo the past, knowing that you had dragged someone you loved into a nightmare they weren't prepared for. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The night air rushed by the windows, and the sound of the tires on the road was the only noise that filled the heavy silence. Sarah couldn't help but think about what they had become, what they had both allowed themselves to become. Once they had been two people with dreams, full of hope, full of love. Now, they were survivors, just trying to make it through. Sarah had once believed in justice above all else, in the law and the right way of doing things. But now, as she sat in the passenger seat of a car with a man who had been branded a criminal, she wasn't sure where justice ended and survival began. "I can't fix this for you," Travis said suddenly, his voice low. "I don't think anyone can." "I don't need you to fix it," she replied quietly, her gaze steady as she looked at him. "I need you to trust me. We're in this together now." There was a long pause, and when Travis finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're too good for this. You deserve a life that's not filled with secrets, with blood. I didn't want you in this world. I never wanted to drag you into it." "I'm already here," Sarah said firmly. "And this is where I need to be. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been caught up in this. You can't carry it alone." The silence that followed was charged, full of everything they had never said to each other, everything they had never been able to admit. As they approached the old warehouse where Travis had been hiding out, Sarah felt a shift in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The danger was palpable now, closer than it had ever been. And yet, as they parked the car and turned off the engine, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity settle in her chest. "This is it," Travis said, his voice steady despite the underlying tension. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. I'm ready." They stepped out of the car together, the night air cold and still. The darkness around them seemed to stretch on forever, but Sarah didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. She was with Travis, and together they had come this far. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As they walked toward the entrance of the warehouse, Sarah's mind raced with everything she had learned, every twist and turn, every piece of the puzzle that had led her here. She had spent so long searching for answers, for justice. But now she realized that justice wasn't a simple thing. It wasn't just about catching the bad guys and locking them away. It was about understanding the complexities of people, of pain, and of forgiveness. They entered the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The place was dark, the shadows stretching long across the concrete floor. Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she could see figures moving in the distance, the unmistakable sound of voices. They weren't alone. Travis stopped, pulling her to a halt beside him. "Get ready," he whispered, his grip tightening around her wrist. "They're here." A group of men stepped into view, their figures silhouetted against the dim light. They were armed, dangerous, and they knew exactly who Sarah and Travis were. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "Sarah Lane," he said with a smirk. "I should have known you'd come. You always were too curious for your own good." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" The man chuckled darkly. "I'm someone who knows exactly how to use people like you. Someone who's been pulling strings for a long time. You've been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Detective." "I'm not backing down," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Whatever you're planning, it ends tonight." The leader's smirk widened. "We'll see about that." Just as he reached for his weapon, Travis moved in front of Sarah, positioning himself between her and the men. His face was a mask of determination. "I'm not letting you hurt her," Travis said, his voice low, filled with the kind of certainty that made Sarah's heart ache. The leader eyed him coldly. "You really think you can stop us? You're already a ghost, Travis. We're just here to finish what we started." In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The world around them stood still, and Sarah realized that this wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about them. It was about choosing to fight for each other, to protect each other, no matter the cost. "I've been fighting for too long to lose her now," Travis said quietly, his voice unwavering. And with that, everything exploded into motion. The battle they had been avoiding, both with the criminals and with themselves, was finally here. The warehouse erupted into chaos. The harsh clang of metal against metal, the crack of gunshots, the shouts of men scrambling for cover, everything moved in an instant, a blur of motion and sound. Sarah's heart was hammering in her chest, but her mind was clear. This was it. This was the moment where everything they had been fighting for would either come to an end or forge something new from the wreckage. Travis moved quickly, pulling Sarah behind a stack of crates, his movements swift and precise, like he had done this 1,000 times before. The adrenaline surged through her veins, but Sarah didn't feel afraid. In that split second, everything slowed down. She knew what she had to do. She knew what they both had to do. "Stay down," Travis muttered, his hand pressing gently against her back, pushing her further into cover. His eyes never left the men advancing toward them, the cold intensity in them a sharp contrast to the warmth of his touch. She could feel the weight of his body between her and the danger, the silent promise he had made to protect her. Sarah could see the men moving closer, their weapons raised. But she wasn't about to be a passive observer. This was her fight, too. They were in this together now, and she wouldn't let Travis carry the weight alone. She glanced at him, her gaze steady. "We do this together," she said, her voice firm. She didn't wait for his response, already moving to a better vantage point, her hand reaching for the gun holstered at her side. Travis's eyes met hers, a flicker of something unreadable in them. He nodded once, and that was all the confirmation she needed. She wasn't just the detective anymore. She was Sarah, and she wasn't going to stand by while everything she had fought for, everything they had fought for, slipped through her fingers. As the first man advanced toward their cover, Travis didn't hesitate. With a single fluid motion, he shot the weapon out of the man's hand, the sound of the shot deafening in the confined space of the warehouse. The man staggered back, cursing under his breath. But he wasn't down. Sarah fired her own shot, swift, sure, hitting her target right in the shoulder. The man crumpled to the ground with a grunt of pain, but still, they were outnumbered. "They're coming from all sides," Travis said urgently, his eyes scanning the room, calculating their next move. He glanced toward a door at the far side of the warehouse. "We need to get out of here." But Sarah knew they couldn't just run, not without taking down the people who were trying to tear everything apart. She could feel the urgency building within her. Every moment they waited was another moment that could tip the scales against them. They had to end this now. With a sudden, sharp decision, Sarah grabbed a nearby metal pipe, using it to shove aside a stack of crates. The sound of the crates toppling over echoed through the room, giving her and Travis a brief moment of cover. The gunfire was sporadic now, distant, confused, the tension palpable. "We can't leave until we've taken them down," Sarah said again, her voice calm but determined. The world outside of this warehouse seemed so far away now. Everything that mattered was here, in this moment, with Travis by her side. Travis gave her a quick, sharp nod, and for the first time, she saw something more in his eyes, something deeper than just survival. He trusted her, and that trust, though fragile, was enough to give them both the strength to continue. The battle didn't last long. The remaining men, realizing they were outmatched, made a hasty retreat, disappearing into the shadows. Sarah could feel her body still tense, her mind still racing as the echoes of gunfire slowly faded into silence. But the adrenaline didn't stop. It kept rushing through her veins, urging her to move faster, to finish this. Travis lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. "You're right," he said, his voice soft. "We're not done yet." Sarah turned to him, her heart beating in her chest, the weight of everything that had happened settling in. "What now?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Travis didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. And for a long moment, they stood there in the aftermath of their chaos, the wreckage of their pasts and the bloodshed of the present swirling around them. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing gently over her skin. There was no time for a kiss, no time for anything but this brief, quiet connection, the only thing they could offer each other in this moment. "Now," Travis said quietly, his voice barely a whisper, "we walk away." They didn't need to say anything more. They had already made their choice. They had already walked through the fire together, and now there was only the path ahead. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple, but it was theirs. They walked out of the warehouse side by side, the doors creaking open into the unknown. The city loomed in the distance, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah didn't feel afraid. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in this moment, she was no longer alone. The morning after the chaos, Sarah stood at the edge of the city looking out over the skyline. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, but the peace of the scene only highlighted the storm inside her. She felt the weight of everything they had been through, every betrayal, every choice, every moment that had led them here. The car engine behind her rumbled to a stop, and she turned to see Travis step out, his movements slow as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. They both knew what had to come next. Sarah had made a choice, and now it was time to face the consequences. "I can't stay here, Travis," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not in this city. Not in the life I had before." Travis met her eyes, the sadness in his gaze evident. But there was understanding there too. "I know. I never wanted you to stay in this world, Sarah. Not after everything." Her heart ached as she spoke, the words coming slowly but truthfully. "I can't keep pretending that I'm not part of it. That this, what we've been through, isn't part of who I am now. But I can't stay in the shadows either. I can't live like this forever." He nodded, stepping closer, and for a moment, Sarah could feel the old connection between them, the one that had been torn apart by time, by choices, by the things they could never undo. But it was still there, quiet, steady, strong. "I don't know what comes next for us, Sarah," Travis said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I can't walk away from this without you. I can't." Sarah's chest tightened. "We've both lost so much. We can't just walk away from everything, can we?" "No," he agreed softly. "But maybe we can start again. Maybe we can find a way to rebuild together." The words hung between them like a fragile thread, a promise that wasn't easy to make, but was made nonetheless. Neither of them was the person they had been before, but that didn't mean they couldn't find something new, something that didn't define them by their past mistakes, by the shadows that still clung to their lives. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the horizon, the future that lay ahead of them, both uncertain but possible. "Then we'll figure it out," she said, her voice firmer now, filled with resolve. "Together." They didn't need to say more. The understanding between them was silent but clear. The choices they had made, the paths they had walked, would always be part of who they were. But they didn't have to let it define them. The future was theirs to shape. Travis stepped closer, and without words, they embraced. It was a quiet, bittersweet moment, but it was also something new, a chance for them both to heal, to move forward, to choose who they would become, not based on the mistakes of the past, but on the hope they had found in each other. As they pulled apart, Sarah smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in days. "Let's go," she said, taking his hand in hers. "Let's walk into whatever comes next." And together, they walked away from the wreckage of the past, toward a future that was uncertain but full of possibilities. The city loomed behind them, but it was the open road ahead, the road they would walk together, that held the promise of a new beginning. The days after their quiet decision passed in a blur. They moved quickly, quietly, without looking back. There was nothing left for Sarah in the city. No more promises, no more illusions. She had learned the hard way that the world wasn't divided into good and bad. right and wrong. Life was messy, complicated, and so was love. Travis had made it clear that his world wasn't one she could easily slip into, but neither was hers. They didn't belong in the same world anymore, and yet they had both chosen to walk into the unknown together, hand in hand, not sure of what the next day would bring, but unwilling to let go of the fragile hope they had found in each other. They left the city behind, the winding roads leading them far from everything that had tried to define them. Travis kept his eyes on the road, his grip on the steering wheel steady. But Sarah could feel his gaze flickering toward her every now and then. She didn't need to speak. She could tell by the way his jaw clenched that he was still battling with his past, the guilt that weighed on him, the choices he had made. But she didn't press him. He would talk when he was ready. They both had their scars, emotional, invisible, and deep. And some things Sarah had learned over the years were better left unspoken until the time was right. They found a small, quiet town by the coast, far from the chaos they had left behind. It was nothing like the life they had once known. No flashing lights, no deadlines, no criminal cases. Just the sound of the ocean and the scent of salt in the air. It was a simple place, a quiet place. But in its simplicity, Sarah began to find the peace she had been searching for all this time. Days passed. They settled into a routine. Travis found work, odd jobs at first, things that kept him busy and his mind occupied. Sarah, too, found herself settling into a rhythm, learning to appreciate the quiet moments between them, the soft conversations in the early hours of the morning, the shared silences that had once felt heavy, but now felt like an unspoken connection. There were times, though, when Sarah would catch him looking out at the horizon, his face shadowed with something she couldn't name. And she knew that his past was something he would never fully escape, but that didn't mean it had to define him. Not anymore, and not for her. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the small cottage they had rented, the sun dipping low in the sky, Sarah looked at him with a gentle smile. She could see the weight lifting from his shoulders, bit by bit. He wasn't the same man who had walked into her life all those years ago. The man who had broken her heart. The man who had disappeared without a trace. He had changed, and so had she. They had both come through the darkness to find each other again, and in doing so, they had found something deeper than love. A quiet understanding, a respect that didn't demand answers. "Do you ever think about the past?" Sarah asked, her voice soft as she traced a finger along the edge of her coffee cup. Travis was silent for a long moment. Then, he looked at her, his eyes steady. "I think about it every day, but it doesn't define me anymore, Sarah." She nodded, her heart swelling with something close to relief. She had always thought she would never get over the past, that it would always haunt her. But sitting here with him, in this quiet corner of the world, she realized that healing was possible, even after everything. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Sarah asked, her voice tentative, unsure of the answer but needing to ask anyway. Travis's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. "I think we made the only choice we could." And in that moment, Sarah understood. It wasn't about the road they had traveled or the battles they had fought. It wasn't about the mistakes they had made or the regrets they carried. It was about the future they were choosing to build together, even if that future was uncertain. It was about the quiet strength that they had found in each other, the strength to move forward, to rebuild, to choose hope instead of despair. There was no need for grand gestures or sweeping declarations. They had already said everything they needed to say. They had already made their decision, and together, they would face whatever came next. "Whatever comes next," Sarah whispered more to herself than to him. "We'll figure it out together." Travis's hand found hers, their fingers entwining naturally, effortlessly. No words were needed. Just this simple connection, this understanding, this unspoken promise that they would never face the world alone again. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky with the last hues of twilight, Sarah felt a sense of peace she had never known before. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the person she had always been meant to be with. And together, they would walk forward into the unknown, hand in hand, knowing that the past could no longer hold them, and that the future was theirs to create. The days rolled on in the small town, quiet and uneventful. The rhythm of their lives became a steady pulse, one that Sarah had never known she needed. The mornings were spent in peace, the hours stretching before them, with the ocean breeze brushing through the open windows of their little cottage. At night, they would sit on the porch, the stars overhead as their only company. It was a life far removed from the chaos and danger that had once defined them. And yet Sarah couldn't deny the comfort it brought. She had spent so many years chasing answers, believing that there was some definitive line between right and wrong, good and bad. But now, as she sat beside Travis in the stillness of the night, she realized that life wasn't about finding the perfect answer. It was about living through the questions and learning to accept the unknowns. They had both been broken, scarred by the choices they had made, the battles they had fought. But in the quiet moments of their new life, Sarah understood that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making peace with it. As the weeks passed, Travis began to open up more, revealing pieces of himself that Sarah hadn't known before. His laughter, once rare and guarded, began to surface more often. He talked about the times they had shared, about the girl he had loved back then, and how he had walked away because he didn't think he deserved her. He spoke of the darkness he had been dragged into and the weight of the guilt that had followed him. "I was running," he admitted one night, his voice soft in the quiet of their home. "I was running from myself, from everything. But you were the one thing I couldn't outrun." Sarah's heart ached as she listened, knowing how much it took for him to say those words. It was the kind of vulnerability that had always been missing between them, the kind of truth they had never shared in their youth. And yet, here they were, both of them broken in different ways, but still choosing to stand beside each other. "I wasn't perfect either," she said, her voice gentle. "I walked away too. I chose justice over love. I chose duty over the things that mattered most." Travis looked at her then, his eyes filled with understanding. "We were both lost, but we're here now, Sarah, and that's enough." And for the first time in a long while, Sarah believed him. She didn't need to search for the answers anymore. She didn't need to fix the broken pieces of her life or try to mend the past. She just needed to be here, right here, in this moment, with him. As they sat together in the fading light of the evening, the quiet hum of the world around them seemed to echo the peace they had found. There were no grand gestures, no promises to make, just this, a simple, unspoken understanding that they had found their way back to each other even after everything. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Sarah didn't feel afraid. She wasn't alone anymore. and neither was he. Travis's hand found hers, the familiar warmth of his touch grounding her in the present. The darkness that had once seemed so overwhelming no longer held the same power over her. They had faced it, together, and come out on the other side. "Together," Sarah whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "Together," he echoed softly. And for the first time in years, they both allowed themselves to believe it. Believe in the possibility of tomorrow, in the quiet strength of the love they had shared, and the love they would continue to build. With that, they stood up, side by side, as the stars began to fill the sky. There was nothing left to prove, no more battles to fight. The world around them was still chaotic, unpredictable. But here, in the quiet of this small town, they had found their peace. The road ahead may not have been easy, but it was theirs to walk together, and that was enough.